Hello, my crafty friends. It's Stacy of Stacy Creates Stuff, and today's Tutorial Tuesday, we're going to do a little embroidery, Japanese embroidery to be exact, Sashiko. I am no Sashiko expert, but I have enjoyed playing around with this technique. I recently taught an in-person quilting class where we did applique and then did some Sashiko in the background to add a little interest. So I am going to show you in today's lesson how to do the cross pattern. Now what's really cool about this is the front, this is the back. So you can see I have a few knots in there as well, but pretty neat for a back, wouldn't you say? Well, let's get started so that you too can learn this very cool technique. The things that you need for this project are a piece of fabric. I'm using just a dark blue fabric. You will also need a white marking pen. I like the Clover brand. These are heat erasable. So you make the mark it here to the side, and it doesn't appear at first and you panic, but you just give it a moment and it will appear. So as I keep telling you about the other items, you will see the two lines that I drew start to appear there. You will also need thread, and I am using pearl cotton number 5. That's the weight of the cotton. I'm using it in white. And you will need a ruler. So you want to make sure that it has 1/4 inch marks. This has 1/4 inch and 1/8 inch marks, but we are using 1/4 inch marks for this. And you can see now that the lines are appearing. All right, the first thing we need to do is to mark out the area where we're going to be stitching. And I am going to make my little stitch area about 6 inches wide. So I'll take my pen and I'm going to go ahead and draw around that. I think I'm going to do an area that is 6 inches by 4 inches. When you're first doing this, I don't recommend starting out too big until you sort of get the idea of how it goes. It's a lot of making little dots that you're about to see. So I've drawn around 4 inches, 6 inches across the top, 4 inches down. Now, because I'm drawing on the outside of the ruler, it's going to be ever so slightly bigger than that, and that's fine. You can see the lines starting to appear here. And then I'm just going to take my ruler and there we go. That line will appear momentarily as well. So again, this is a heat erasable pen. So when I'm all done stitching, I will just take an iron, really the tip of an iron, and just press over it, and all my lines will disappear. All right, the next part that we're going to do is mark across on the top line 1/4 of an inch in little increments. So let me bring this down just a little. And then every 1/4 of an inch, I am just making a little tick mark on the line. And again, with these particular pens, you don't see the mark right away. So I'm just having a little faith in myself that I'm getting all the marks. There we go. Now, as they are waiting to appear, I'm going to slide up and do the same thing to this bottom line. Okay. Give that just a moment to come into view. And then I'm going to be turning my ruler, and I'm left-handed, which is why I'm starting on the left and working over. If you're right-handed, you can certainly start on the right, work over that way. It doesn't matter. All the dots have to be drawn. And then placing my ruler so that I can see the tick mark, so that when I go to make the new marks. I'm making them in line with that. I am going to make a dot every 1/4 of an inch. And that's why when you draw your box in the beginning, you want to make sure that it isn't just totally random, because it has to come out somehow to a 1/4 of an inch. So you could use a whole inch increment, 1/2 inch, 1/4 of an inch. So like 2 1/4 inches by 2 1/4, that would have worked. All right, so I've made my marks. They will take a moment to appear. If any of them are too faded, you can just give them another little tap. It seems like it's a bit of a slow process, but once you get going, there's really no reason to wait and see. I'm waiting to see so you can see that there really are going to be dots. But I'm going to go ahead and move on, and until I have the entire box covered with 1/4 inch dots away. And again, I'm starting so that I know that if I put my pen down, I'm on that tick mark. I'm not aligning the ruler over top the tick mark. I'm making sure I could remake it. If you are wanting to try the Sashiko techniques, the different stitches, and you are less inclined to want to make yourself little gridded fabric, you could use cross-stitch cloth, like Aida cloth. That already has holes, and it's marked out in a grid. It comes in different sizes. You could start with a 12 or 14 for some slightly larger motifs, and it goes down to 18, 20, and 22 counts for a much smaller count. So the larger the number, the smaller the little stitches will be. But that is a good way to try out and familiarize yourself with different Sashiko patterns. Not all of them will work on Aida cloth, but anything that is gridded in a rectangular type grid or square grid will work great. And you can see as I'm trudging along here to make all these marks that the previous column of dots keeps appearing. It just takes a little time. All right, I have made it to the end where I still have a solid line, and I do want to go ahead and put tick marks on that line, and I'll do that to the same at the beginning. All right, we are all gridded out. You can see those last few dots are starting to appear, and we are ready to move on to the next step. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to be using pearl cotton. This is size 5 pearl cotton, and so it's a fairly thick cotton. It'll definitely show up. I am using white. You can use any color that you wish as long as it contrasts. That's part of the beauty of this. And I am using a Sashiko needle. You do not have to have a Sashiko needle. They are long. They come in various lengths, but you do want a needle that has a sharp point and a large enough eye to be able to get your pearl cotton through it relatively easily. If you don't have pearl cotton and you have an embroidery floss, you could try 3 strands of embroidery floss. You could try various other embroidery type threads as well. But I like the pearl cotton to start off with because it stays together, unlike embroidery floss, which is stranded and the strands can separate. This makes it very nice to stay together. So I'm going to thread my needle off camera because that could take a while. There we go. So we'll be moving to the end. I cut my piece, I don't know, maybe about 24 inches long. Somewhere between 18 and 24 is ideal. You don't want it too long because it just wears on the pearl cotton, dragging it through the fabric so many times. So you can just keep it at a short enough length that you'll probably be able to make several passes back and forth. and I do knot the end. Now, I am teaching you a Sashiko stitch called crosses, and I am not necessarily using traditional Sashiko methods. So traditionally you wouldn't knot. There's a way to start the thread, but we're making it easy on ourselves to just get a little practice in the concept of doing Sashiko embroidery. So the embroidery is done first in this case, horizontal rows. So we'll be starting and going over and coming back and forth, making our stitches. When all the horizontals are done, then we will start and do the verticals. And the back of this work is going to look as amazing as the front. I promise. So let's go on to the next part, actually doing the stitches. I have my pattern here, and we're going to take a look first at the horizontal. And this pattern is available to download for free by joining my email list. So we are going to be starting in the upper right, and we are starting one dot in, because you can see there's stitches here to the end. So I'm going to be coming up on that top line as close as I can to the dot. Now I'm left-handed, so I'm going to have to turn my work around. If you're right-handed, you can be going in that direction. So again, we're working on this part, and the stitching is very simple. We are essentially going to go over to the next dot, then we're going to come up from under to the next dot, over, under, over, under. Think of it like weaving, just your basic tabby weaving, which is over one, under one. So we're going over one space, under one space, over one space, under one space, all the way across until we get to the end. But we don't want to come up if this is our last dot. It'll depend on how many dots you have across where exactly you end. So when we get to there, we'll revisit that rule. So again, because I'm left-handed, I'm turning it around, but you go in whatever direction is comfortable for you. And because the needle is nice and long, I can actually just kind of poke in and out where the little dot is. And then when I have my needle loaded up, I'm going to gently pull the thread through, making sure that I don't pull it tight. I want it to lay nice and flat. If you are more comfortable using a hoop, you could certainly do that. It doesn't really allow you to scrunch your fabric, of course, because the hoop will keep it taut. But I did have a student who was working the Sashiko in a hoop. It's then more of a stabbing motion in and out rather than being able to load up your needle. All right, we're getting close to the end here. Let's see how it plays out. All right, I'm still one from the end, so that's perfect. So as I was saying before, if this row wasn't here and this was my last dot, I would not have come up onto the top of the fabric on the last dot. Now, as it is, I have another dot, so I'm able to go down. The reason for that is you have nowhere to go. We are only going horizontally. And so to move to the next row, I'd have to go, and that we don't want to do that on the front of the fabric. That is, of course, exactly what's going to happen on the back. Let me turn this back around so that it's in the right orientation to the pattern here. So we've started that. The next two rows are going to be the same as each other, but they are offset one space from the row we just did. So I'm going to go down into this last hole here, and rather than coming up so that this would be making a stitch here, I want my first stitch to be across these two dots. So I'm going to be going on the back on a diagonal so that I come up at that stitch. Let me go ahead and do that part so you can see. There we go. And again, don't pull too tightly. And now I'm going to just continue in the same over under pattern, right? So over that space, under that space, and so forth, all the way across. Let me pull that so you can see. All right, it doesn't seem very exciting at this point, but trust me, the excitement comes when we start making the verticals, but we have to fill up our horizontal first. So I'm going to continue the end of this row. Do not worry if your stitches are a little crooked. That is actually part of the charm. Certainly, as you get better and better at it, your stitches will be straighter and straighter. This technique was developed as a mending technique, and perfection was not the aim. Beauty is the aim, and you will get that. And the beauty comes not from perfection. All right, I'm almost to the end of that row, and I am able to go down into this last dot. And this third row is exactly like the second row. You see how they are parallel to each other. They are not offset. So I'm going to go ahead and do that row. And this time I will just be coming straight down. And of course, I'm going to turn my work so that I'm stitching in the direction that is comfortable. And again, this row is going to be just like the row above it. So you can see that those lines are parallel, offset from that first row. If you make a mistake, just unthread your needle and pull back the thread, usually from the back side of the fabric, until you get to a point where you don't have that mistake and you can correct going forward. All right, so here you can see I am down to the last few dots. I'm gonna pull them up, but I don't want to come up here because I'll have no place to go horizontally. I'm out of sorts. So I'm just going to go ahead and pull this from the back. Turn this back around so it's in the same orientation. And you can see now that the next two rows are going to be offset in the same way that that first row is. And the bold lines that I have here is the pattern repeat. So it's two lines that are in parallel and then two lines offset, two lines, two lines, two lines back and forth. That is the horizontal for this particular pattern. It does change depending on the pattern that you're doing. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up my needle right here on the end. Again, making sure I'm not pulling tightly, and begin stitching across. And you can see how this row is going to be offset from the previous two rows. I do want to make note, though, that when you get to having just a few inches of thread left, that you can pull your thread to the back, knot it, start a new thread, and just continue on at the next dot. Sometimes I try to, and that's probably going to be the case here, end when I'm at the end of a row, but that doesn't always work out. It is okay to end in the middle of a row. And again, you just pick up and come up where the next place would be. I try to aim more for the end because it makes it easier when you go to do the vertical to not have to jiggle that knot a little bit out of the way as you're doing the vertical stitches. So I'm going to continue stitching, and then we will come back and take a look at all the finished horizontal rows. All right, here I am with all the horizontal rows done, and to look on the back, you can see that it's nice and neat. I've got some little stitches down the side that transition from one row to the next, and a couple of places where I have start and end knots. So now we're going to get ready to do the vertical. So we'll be starting in this top corner, and we're going to be doing the same type of thing, over, under, stitching over the space, under the space, over the space, and so forth. And that is going to start to make the cross. It takes about 4 to 5 rows or columns to actually start seeing the crosses come to life or to fruition. So let's just get started and we'll see. So this first column here, I still have a few dots that I'll be connecting, but after that I will be stitching. You can't see the dots as much before, but I will be using the end point of the horizontal stitches as my place. So any part where I was off slightly from the dot, I'm disregarding that. I'm only looking for the start and end point. So traditionally, the stitches would be very close to each other when I come up to make the next stitch, but we're not going to worry about that. We're just trying to get the rhythm down of how the cross stitch works. So I'm going to turn my work so that I can see it a little bit better. And I'm coming up as close to the end point of that stitch as possible. And you see I have 2 dots along that line, so I'm just using those as guides, just like I did for the horizontal rows. And then when I get to the next part, I'm going to use the end of the stitch as my guide, and the same thing, end of the stitch as my guide where to come up. Now these vertical rows do not follow the same 2-2 pattern that we had going for the horizontals. So remember, for the horizontal, as you can turn it back around here, we had a set of lines, and then we offset the next 2 lines back to the original position, 2 lines, and so forth. It's going to be different, but let's get through this first column first. And the same rule applies. I don't want to end up coming up at the end of the row, so I can make this stitch, but I don't want to come up at this very corner dot because I have no place to go. I want to continue vertically. So now let's take a look at our directions, and the next row, which will be coming up from the bottom, is offset. So in this particular case, I am able to go down because there is still another row here, but if not, if this row wasn't here, then I would just be offsetting by coming up. So just because the instructions say go down, if you don't have space to go down, it's okay, just go up. The point is that you want to be offsetting the line. So I'm going to turn my work to make it a little bit easier for me and continue this row. And again, this particular pattern, it is over, under, over, under. Now these stitches are much bigger than traditional Sashiko, but again, we're trying to get into the rhythm. You can see something starting to happen. All right. So I'm able to go down here, but I don't want to come up at the very edge. So looking at the next row, which will be our column 3, I'm back up into the original position of the first one. And you can see that these bolded lines, we have, we'll call this one the A, which I just finished. And then we have BB, and then it'll be A, BB. We started on the second part of the B, and that's fine. You can really start anywhere in the pattern. You just want to make sure that you're going A, BB, A, BB. So we just finished an A, and now we need to do a B. So that is going to be different than the row we did. We have just essentially finished off the tops of, or the sides of the crosses, and this we're getting ready to make the next section of crosses. And again, just like on the horizontal, we are not pulling the thread too tightly. All right, and the next column is another B column. So I'll just be going right over here. And we'll really start to see those crosses forming here. All right, that was our second B. See, those two are parallel, and now we need to do an A. So I'll be able to go down here, but instead of coming up over here, I want to come up on the end of that, which makes sense because we want to close off this part of the cross. And at the same time, we'll be making the closing off the next set of crosses. So turn this back around. That's I'm gonna go down here. That's gonna finish off essentially an A column. And then we're gonna do 2 B columns, which makes sense because that is this is gonna be a cross right here. It's hard, I don't have enough hands to hold it all off. There we go. Those little stitches there that aren't fully formed. So we know we wanna get parallel to that, and then it's offset 1, and then it's parallel again. So you're able to read the work once you get going. It's always good to have the instructions as a reference, but beyond that, you just keep going. Getting to the end of my thread, so I'm going to just pull it back here so I can knot it off. But before I do that, we'll take a look again, and you can see how the crosses are starting to form. Now, are my crosses all perfect? Of course not. But trust me, as you get through the whole thing, it's all going to even out, and it'll look just great. So now the other thing is the back looks so nice. And you get essentially a reverse of the over-under, just like you would in weaving, on the back side. So it's kind of like a nice little added bonus. All right, I'm going to go finish this, and then I will show you the finished result. All right, the piece is all done, and I touched it with a hot iron. Didn't press down on my stitches so much as just gave the heat so that it erased the white pen. And of course, you can see on the back has a lovely pattern as well. This could indeed be a pattern that you do on the front. Of course, you wouldn't have the knots disrupting the pattern. It's the same under-over pattern. It's just the reverse of this one. I'd recommend, if you are just starting out, to maybe do a 4" by 4" square or thereabouts. That gives you a pretty decent amount of stitching to do and to kind of see if you like it or not. Mine was 6 by 4, also a good size. Anything bigger than that might just be a little much to start out with. You know, start small and go from there. The more that you practice, the better that your stitches will get. So if you look closely, my crosses are not at all perfect, but looking at it as a whole, they're not bad. Of course, there's always room for improvement. I hope you enjoyed this Tuesday tutorial. I tried to change things up from getting a little bit away from quilting, although this was quilting adjacent because I did recently use Sashiko on a quilted wall hanging. But I do love embroidery and handwork, so you will be seeing a few more bits of that in upcoming Tuesday tutorials, and maybe, just maybe, in February, there might be some knitting. We'll see. I keep saying that there'll be knitting, and it's been months, but Someday there will be. In the meantime, my friends, why not check out